in perpetuity after this on the My Son Facebook, or no, the YouTube channel with Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, May 20th session of Solar Stories, sponsored by Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. It's Thursday, the third Thursday, so that means it's the Detroit Solar Stories. And tonight's speaker is going to be Diane Cheklich, who's going to share with us how she put together a Detroit condo PPA. We believe it's probably the first in the state of Michigan, and she has a great story and incredible images to share with us about how the project works. I'm Diane Van Buren, and I'm the host of Detroit Solar Stories every fourth or third Thursday of the month. And we have financial sponsors, including the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE, and McNaughton McKay. And we'll go to the next slide. So there are 4 sessions. Jen Server, what happens if there's a 5th Thursday? Is it just free time?
Energy Q&A.
Oh, energy Q&A. Okay, good. Well, the standard 4 each month. We start on the first Thursday of the month with Ann Arbor Solar Stories, and Julie Roth, who's the manager of Solarize Ann Arbor, is the host of that one. The second Thursday of the month, Mark Clevey, who is one of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy members and vice president, sponsors the talk on clean energy. And so it's a variety of topics, not just solar. As I said, it's the third Thursday, and I'm your host, also Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association board member and co-owner of D2 Solar, which is a solar company here in Detroit. Full disclosure, my business partner is Diane Cheklich as tonight's speaker. Hence, you get 2 Dianes and D2 Solar. The fourth Thursday is John Sarver, who started this whole My Son Solar Stories, and I'm sure he appreciates how we've all come in to help with the weekly talks. And he has the energy Q&A and a variety of stories from around the state of Michigan. So let's go on to the next slide. We want to let everybody know that this is the 30th year of Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, who is the sponsor of the whole My Son and the talks that we're doing. So formed in 1991, we are supported by our members. And members can include people who are solar installers all the way down to solar users, anyone who's interested in renewable energy in the state of Michigan and beyond. I think we have some members who are beyond the state, but who are advocates for renewable energy in the Great Lakes. And that includes geothermal as well as solar. And our last slide before we go on to tonight's presentation, ways that you can become more active with Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. We are a member supported organization, so we do have dues. But also there are ways that you can be a financial sponsor of events that we do have. Help grow our membership, spread the word. There's a lot of people out there who are advocates for solar and don't realize that their collective voice with ours will help with policy at the state level and the national level and the local level as well. So that's why we're here. And always happy to take a donation. So with that, I think the commercials are done and we can begin our talk tonight. So while that's being set up, let me introduce to you Diane Cheklich. Diane and I go way back to the days of Belle Isle and the rowing crew there. So this is well over 10 years, maybe more. She's also a fellow Detroiter. And one day said to me, I want to do something about solar. I've got to do something that we can put more effort into how we're going to solve the climate crisis. What do you think? And so we started talking about what can we do? What should we do? What could we, 2 women in Detroit with busy careers already, How could we make a difference? And it took a few years, but we finally came to the conclusion that we had to move the needle on solar through policy as well as through action. And so D2 Solar was born. We're the co-chairs of the Renewable Energy Subcommittee in Detroit with the Green Task Force, which is a city council committee. And so we work on policy as well as action on a volunteer side. Diane's also on the Audubon Society board here in Detroit. So she works on advocacy in more than one way. So yes, Jen, she'll be interested in your birds. And together, we also started a warehouse for collectively working with the solar installers in Detroit so that we could reduce the cost of solar and help spread the word. So we like to think that by taking the action on both ends, on the policy as well as the doing side, we're moving the needle on solar here in Detroit. So tonight she's going to be telling us about how she was able to really move the needle on solar by starting with her condominium association and installing solar for the Willys Overland Lofts in the Cass Corridor here in Detroit. So Diane, it's your time.
All right, thank you very much, Diane. I appreciate that. And thank you, John and GLREA for inviting me to speak tonight. Like Diane said, I'm going to talk about the project, the solar project at Willys Overland Lofts. And but first, a little bit of background. Like Diane said, we are both very motivated by fighting climate change, and we have a sense of urgency to take action in addition to try and move the needle on policy. So I'm sure everyone on this call has seen the headlines. Carbon emissions, even though they took a little break during the pandemic, continue to be a huge problem, and different climate systems are reaching a tipping point. And just this week, just 2 days ago, the International Energy Agency said it's time to stop using fossil fuels. And so, so we're going to talk about how you can do that at condominium. My building went solar just over a year ago, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that happened. So we're at Willys Overland Lofts in Detroit. It's a single building, 66 unit condo. It's 100 years old, so it's got some nice history to it. This building is the place where they used to sell and service Willys Overland Jeeps in World War II. And you can see in the photo on the lower right-hand side, that was the actual sign that advertised the building. We have concrete floors, and there are oil stains on the floors from when they used to change the oil on the Jeeps. And so the building's got a lot of character, and you can never tell when your floors are dirty. So it's kind of nice. We do have a flat roof, and we have high electric bills. Like a lot of developers, they went for, the least expensive, not the most efficient options when it came to the infrastructure of the building. And so in our common areas alone, we had a $30,000 a year electric bill. We also have an active sustainability committee in our building, which I am a part of. And this is our team. We do an annual tire inflation check on Super Bowl Sunday to make sure everyone's keeping their tires pumped up in the wintertime. But our team is active and always looking for ways to make our building more sustainable and also to save on operating costs. So one of the first things, and this is a conventional wisdom in the whole solar community as well, is where can you look for energy efficiencies, right? The less energy you need to consume, the less solar that you need, so you can keep your costs down all the way up and down that chain. So in 2018, our sustainability committee embarked on a LED conversion project where we converted all of our common area lights, hallways, exterior lights, parking garages, and stairwells to LEDs. And these lights, except for the exterior lights, all the hallway, parking garage, and stairwells were lights that were on 24 hours a day. okay? And they were not energy efficient. They were fluorescent, but still there was a lot of room for improvement there. So we converted all those to LED in 2018. And we also put motion activated lights in the stairwells. If you think about it, why do you need lights on at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone's in bed? So they completely turn off when there isn't any motion in the stairwells, and we save a lot of energy that way as well. In our garages, we have 3 bulb fixtures, and when we put the LEDs in there, our garages got a lot brighter. And we realized, well, we don't really need it to be that bright. I mean, it's just a parking garage. So we took 1 light bulb out of the 3 bulb fixtures. And so we have 2/3 of the lights in the garage, which still gives us plenty of illumination. And we saved 1/3 of that consumption right off the bat. So that's a simple low-tech thing that we ended up doing there. Our estimated savings in electricity is about $6,000 a year. We worked with a lighting supplier who had all the templates to calculate these savings. And we took advantage of some pretty generous multi-unit building rebates from DTE, and the payback on that whole project ended up being less than a year. In fact, it was really kind of less than a month. By the time you look at all that, it was like $11,000 expense and $10,000 in rebates. So converting to LED was a smart move for the building and really saves a lot in operating expense. So the next question for our sustainability committee was, how do we go solar? That's a tricky thing when you don't own your own roof. You think about it when you live in a house and you decide to go solar, you just get solar and you are the sole decision maker. When you live in a condominium, there are many decision makers. There's a board, there are residents, and I couldn't just go put solar on the roof myself. It had to be coordinated with everyone in the building. So we needed to figure this out, and there really weren't any case studies out there for us to look at. So we had to kind of blaze the trail ourselves. I personally had some prior experience with solar on a flat roof. I was part of a house of worship solar project in Ferndale that got installed in 2017. This kind of gets back to my own personal urgency to do something about climate change. Since I didn't know how to put solar on my building where I lived, this project came up in Ferndale, and I thought, okay, well, I will invest in that project. And so that was a third-party ownership PPA model there, and get solar out into the world somewhere. And so that has been operating for the last 4 years. And my experience for that project helped to inform what we did here at Willys. So one of the first things was that we did, the sustainability committee did, was to put a survey out to the residents. Is anyone interested in this idea besides the sustainability committee? So we put out a survey, did a survey monkey thing, and asked people, you know, are you interested in this? And 70% of the people who replied said yes. And we also broke it down. Do you think we should pay for this ourselves, you know, as an association, or third party, to go the third party investor route, where we could still save money, but not as much. So we framed it that way and asked it that way. Or are you not interested at all? And these 3 bars here represent the responses. 70% were interested, 30% were not. And out of that 70%, the majority of them said they would be willing to pay for it through a special assessment in the association. And 30% said, no, let a third party buy it and we'll still get savings, but less. So this was our first step to sort of socialize the idea among the residents of the building. So the next step was to go out and get some quotes to find out really how much it would cost. Because I'm in the solar business, I have a general idea, but I was not in a position to confirm what all the installers would say. So we did have some members of our sustainability committee put together an RFP. I did not participate in that process because I'm in the solar business, so I wanted to stay in arm's length away from it and be independent of the selection process. So we put out this RFP. This is what the first page of it looked like. Got several bids back, and that gave us a more accurate idea of how much solar would cost to put on the building. So then we took one of those numbers from one of the quotes and did some more analysis on it. If the association bought it through a special assessment there, and in that case, the association would realize they would own the solar and realize the full savings that the solar could provide. And the estimate was that would be about $10,000 in electricity savings per year, and over $500,000 over 30 years. And one of the interesting things we found out in this process was that even though our association, a condominium association, is a nonprofit entity, the owners, the resident owners of the building, if they paid for the solar through a special assessment, can still take advantage of the federal tax credit that was available. Even though the owner would be the association, a nonprofit association, the residents of the building could still take advantage of the federal tax credit. So that was an interesting discovery that we made along the way. So if it was a $3,000 federal $3,000 special assessment, the net cost would end up being around $2,100. So that was good information that we didn't know before going through this process. And if the association would own the solar, it would pay for itself in energy savings after about 11.2 years. The other option was a third-party investor-owned or power purchase agreement model. And in this case, the association does not put out any money, zero capital outlay. It's all paid for by third-party investors, like what I did at the Ferndale Church. And so the solar would sit on the roof of the condo, and the condominium would pay for the energy that comes from it. They wouldn't own the asset, but they would pay for the energy that comes from it. And that money would go to the investors who will have formed an LLC. And the balance of the electricity, because the estimate was that if we maxed out our roof, it would supply about 50% of our common area electricity. So the balance of that would still come from DTE. But the idea would be that this energy that the building would buy from the investors would be at a discount from what DTE charges. So the building, even though it doesn't own it, would still save money from day one, starting from day one, because there's zero capital outlay, zero payback calculation. You save money starting day one. So those are the two options: the building to own it outright through a special assessment, or that investors would own it and the building would just pay for the energy. So considering the fact that there was a 70% interest in this from that initial informal survey, we thought, well, let's put it to a vote and be more like formal about it. So we had our lawyers draw up a ballot, a special assessment ballot, that basically said, yes or no, do you approve paying for solar on our roof through a special assessment? Well, even though there was that interest in the original survey, by the time it got to making a financial commitment to it, the measure did not pass. It was relatively close, but it did not pass. And some people were interested about an 11-year payback. Other people just didn't like the idea of having any kind of special assessment. And so it ended up not passing. However, the PPA option was considered a backup at that point, and that was approved by our board. So I was also instrumental in recruiting investors for this PPA, because, you know, yes, theoretically we can find these investors, but we didn't have commitments there yet either. So it turns out that we had 11 neighbors in the building who saw the value of this. Several of them were on that on our sustainability committee, but 11 people came together and said, yes, I want to be part of this PPA and greenlight this solar on our building. And as residents, they see the benefit to the building. As investors, they also saw the benefit to the investors as well. And the benefits to them as investors are kind of the typical lineup of solar benefits. At that point, we had a 30% tax credit in place. Because we formed an LLC, there was another business benefit of 100% depreciation. Also, our building happens to be in an opportunity zone, which is which came out of the latest tax law that allowed, if there was an improvement project that happens in an area, investors can defer or eliminate capital gains tax. So our building happens to be in an opportunity zone, so we're able to take advantage of that as well. And then, so those are all tax credits so far. And then we would also have the energy revenue coming in when the building pays for the energy generated by the solar. The terms of the PPA were a 20-year term with the option for the building to buy out the solar starting in year 6. So there's a schedule of payments or of costs if the building decides to buy out the solar before year 20. That's built into the contract. And then the energy for the PPA is priced at 80% of the DTE rate. So a lot of PPAs will price it at a fixed number that has an escalation attached to it each year. Ours, we ended up taking the DTE price and subtracting 20%. So that's a calculation that we do every month. And so we can essentially guarantee that our building saves 20% off the DTE rate, whatever that might be. So that's something a little bit different than what I've seen in other PPA models. And we got to form a cool little logo. So our LLC is called West Willis Power and Light. Our street is West Willis, and so we're kind of the local energy supplier. The resources that we brought to bear on this, we did, when you form an LLC, it's a legal entity and you have to make sure that you have all the proper documentation in place. So we did work up a contract, and there were lawyers involved from both the association side and also from the LLC side. So there were a couple back and forths on the contract document itself between them. There was an accountant involved to help us basically register the LLC and register the investors for the LLC. But we didn't start from scratch on this. And this is one of the points of my talk today, is that the resources that are out there, there were already resources that were out there, and there are resources as a result of this project that can help the next one. So we used the PPA contract template that's available from Michigan IPL, and that actually came out of the Department of Energy Sunshot project back in 2017 and 18. So there was a PPA template that came out of that. We used the operating agreement that I had in my church PPA, and we also used a subscription agreement that basically is the investor commitment to X number of shares of the project. And that was supplied by our friends at the House of Worship Genesis in Ann Arbor. So these pieces and parts came together relatively easily. We didn't have to start from scratch, and that was a nice bonus for the project. So through the RFP process, we selected Michigan Solar Solutions, which is an established installer in the state of Michigan, and we installed a 94.4 kilowatt array. So there are 236 solar panels on the roof of our building, and the system is connected to our common area electric service. So I, as a resident, don't see this on my monthly DTE bill, but the building does. The building gets the benefit of that. And that makes sense because the building is the one buying the solar electricity from the LLC. The construction began in October 2019, and the system went live in December of that year. you can see here in this photo on the right, I mean, we loaded the solar panels on the roof with a crane. We had to coordinate with our residents to clear out part of the parking lot for the crane to come in. And so this is part of the, you know, ongoing community engagement of a project like this. And everyone was very cooperative along the way, but it did require some coordination. So these are some still shots of the building. You can see the one on the left is facing north, and that's the Wayne State campus, and facing south is the skyline of downtown Detroit. So our solar panels have kind of a nice view. These are our inverters. I think we have two 33 kilowatt inverters and one 30 kilowatt inverter. And to the right is the layout of what it looks like on our building. That's from the Solar Edge monitoring application. And a friend of mine is a drone pilot, and so he came over and shot some footage for me. I'm going to show you a little 45-second promo where you can see how the solar looks in action. I forgot to mention, but it's obvious that the solar array is a ballasted array. So all the panels are sitting on the roof. There's no penetration there, which was an important consideration because, like I said, we have a 100-year-old building and we have a tendency toward having leaks in units, and we didn't really want to have any further penetrations in the roof. So ballasted systems are typical for a flat roof installation anyway, but to me, that was an extra reassurance that it wouldn't contribute to any leak problems or damage in our building. So once the system was up and running, now we had settled into a steady state operations mode, and our LLC, I'm one of the managing members of the LLC. There's one other person, and we have it's minimal operations, but it is something that anyone considering this should be aware of. There's a monthly billing process for the energy, and we just pull off the amount of energy produced each month, put that on a QuickBooks bill and send it to the building's property manager. So that's a pretty straightforward process. We did get liability insurance for our array. It's on the top of the building. There's a very low chance that there would be any liability problem, but it is something that we decided to get as an LLC. In some cases, in my church PPA, for example, the insurance for that array is covered by the church, and that was part of that arrangement. So insurance is on a case-by-case basis. It may or may not be an expense to the LLC that's operating it. One of the other things that we discovered in this project is that we're required to charge sales tax on our energy. And remember, our association is even though it's a nonprofit, it's a certain kind of nonprofit where they still do pay sales tax. So we are required to pay sales tax and register with the state to collect sales tax. We have annual tax accounting expenses and also annual disbursements to the investor members for our revenue that we collected through the year, and troubleshooting as needed. We did have a couple of inverter issues early in the project, but those were all sorted out under warranty. It was it was the early days of the COVID pandemic. And so our inverters were out longer than we wanted them to be because there was just, all the logistics had come to a grinding halt back in March of last year. So we paid a little bit of a price for that, but you know, what are you going to do? And things have been running fine since then. So the point of this slide is that there is ongoing operations, but they're quite manageable, and they're definitely not a full-time job for anybody. So the benefits for the building so far are we've generated 149 megawatt hours of electricity, and with the pricing mechanism we have in place, that translates into $2,500 to date of energy savings for the building. Over 30 years, that's expected to be over $200,000 in savings, with a net present value of $114,000. Those last two numbers assume that the building will buy out the solar after year 20, after the end of the contract term, for $20,000. So if the building chooses to buy out the solar array sooner, then the savings numbers should be even higher, because the building can take full advantage of the savings potential when that happens. But this assumes a 20-year term goes to term. On the environmental side of it, so far we have saved over 200,000 pounds of carbon emissions, and the equivalent of 1,700 trees planted. So this is very important to me, as I said earlier, and I'm happy that that our building is sustainable and saving money at the same time. So here's a summary of the steps that I've been through, because there are quite a few moving parts, starting with community engagement to socialize the idea and find out how much, if any, interest there is in going solar, because building support is important to make it happen. Secondly, get the board engaged. The board is critical to approving these steps along the way, the financial decisions, and also entering into any contract for a PPA model. Getting quotes, analyzing the financial options. Remember, we talked about paying for it yourself from the building, or getting third-party investors. So I think those are two typical options. We considered real briefly taking out a loan, but there wasn't much appetite for that. So it boiled down to those two, the special assessment approach or a third-party investor. Selecting the installer and also choosing how you want to finance it. And if you are going a PPA route, to recruit investors, form the LLC and go through that paperwork, install the solar, and go live and save money and save the planet. So, you know, like I said, there are a lot of moving parts, but if a condo is interested in taking the plunge, then this is proof that it can be done. And the next one should be even easier. And one of the things we found out recently is that solar is a selling point for units in our building. This is an active real estate listing for a unit in my building, and a friend of mine brought this to my attention. You can see here, new solar panels on the roof supply energy to common areas, making Willys an ecological choice. So if there are people out there looking for a sustainable building, you know, it helps attract interest that way. So that is my story, and I really appreciate your time and attention. I am happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thank you, Diane. I always know that Diane puts together the best presentations and beautiful images. She's a videographer, so she does great work in that regard. Really fascinating story. So you can type your questions in the chat if you like. We do have one that started, plus I have a few that I'd like to put in as well. So the first question came in about how do the condo members save money? So we know that the individual meters aren't being affected. Can you go through that one more time, Diane, on how the condo members save money?
Sure.
Whether they're an investor or not.
Right. And that, if you remember, I said we have a $2,500 savings to date. That expense, that money is being saved by the building, of which everyone is a member. We pay monthly dues, as all condos do, and those dues pay the electric bills. So we are keeping our dues. The way we look at this is that we don't have to raise dues because we're able to save this money. So that is the benefit that the members in the building see, is we're trying to keep our dues, even as inflation ticks up every year. We're trying to not have to increase dues. And so if we can save, a couple $1,000s a year with zero capital outlay, then that's going to add up and help us keep our operating costs under control. So it doesn't directly go into people's pockets, but it allows our members to keep our dues under control.
So savings is always a tricky concept because you don't actually see the cash unless you budgeted for it first.
Right.
And then you see the difference at the end of the year.
Right.
So another question that came up, and I think it's a fairly simple answer, but the 80% that you mentioned, that's because it's 80% of whatever rate DTE is charging, I assume. So if DTE is charging 12 cents a kilowatt hour, the PPA is charging 80% of the rate of whatever DTE is charging.
That's correct.
Okay. Explain that a little bit more.
So,
okay.
so the building saves 20% for the solar electricity. They pay 20% less than if it was to pay DTE for that same energy. So that's how the price of the solar gets calculated. And that's we want, because we're all residents of the building. I mean, the investors this is definitely kind of a social impact investment for the people who are involved. The intention was to try and save the building money. And so we made as generous of a pricing scheme as we could.
Okay. And so that's why in your assessment where you said save $2,500 to date, that's based on that 80%
Yes.
charge, right? It's for a homeowner, it would have been a whole lot more. A building owner, you would have had the whole savings, but with the PPA,
Right.
You're only getting the savings. So
correct. It's not the whole savings.
Okay.
If it was the whole savings, if the building owned the array, the building would be saving $10,000 a year.
Yeah. But I kind of lived through this whole process as it was going on with the starts and the stops. And oh my God, I can't believe this is happening now with hearing Diane's saga of how it was going.
Yeah.
And it was amazing when you thought it was slam dunk, everyone's for it. And then it was, wait a second.
Yeah.
So sometimes push comes to shove. That's when you find out what people really want.
Right. And that's okay.
It's
okay. It's like,
okay.
you
Well, it worked out. And
Yep.
actually now you're a trailblazer. So with the PPA. This is a question that's come up recently in other circles, and that is the taxable value of the investment in terms of property tax. Now we know in Ann Arbor, we've had this discussion a few other times. Has the city of Detroit assessed a property tax on the panels?
They have not, to my knowledge, so far.
Okay, because it is a business. It is a separate, so we're not going to tell them. We'll keep that quiet for now. Also,
Diane.
John Sarver is asking, did the board make the decision, or was it the members of the whole condominium that made the decision of what to do, which direction to go?
The board made the decision. The board signed the contract, but the board decision was informed by that survey that we did back in 2018 that said, a majority of the building was interested in it. And so that was a representative decision on the part of the board.
But the vote on whether or not to actually go with the assessment versus PPA? Was that a board decision or did the whole building?
No,
vote
the
on
whole
that?
building voted on that. That was that special assessment ballot that I showed.
Okay, that was, I think, the
That was the
question, right?
whole building. And the board
Okay.
decided to sign the PPA, and the LLC was essentially another vendor to the building. And
Okay,
that's the role that it's playing. So, yes. But the whole
Okay.
building voted on the special assessment.
so a question is, after 5 years, how much would the system have depreciated and what would the buyout cost be at the earliest point in time?
I need to look that up. I kind of have it right over here, but I can look it up because we have that whole schedule. So let me check that and I will answer that in a moment. Is there another question first?
What happens, I think this one we've already kind of answered, but do you use most of the kilowatts on site? I think you've had a few instances where you've got the 7.5. Oh no, you're net metered. You slid in under net metering, right?
Well, we're net metered, but we're also in a D3 rate schedule. So it's a whole different ballgame there. And it's the net metering for that level of rate schedule is not as attractive as it was. We did get in under net metering for what it's worth, but it's a different dynamic than with a residential.
Okay. So the question about when DTE raises its rates, your intention is that no matter what the rate is with DTE, you'll stay at 80%?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So we're looking up the buyout.
Yeah.
And the decision was to make it 20 years,
It's a
a 20-year buyout?
It's a 20-year term with the option to buy out at any point after year 5.
Okay.
So that's it. They have an option anytime in there to do it. If they buy out at year 20, at year 6, it would be $151,000 for the buyout price. And that it's just a straight line reduction.
So that would be about 50% of the original installation cost. Is that right, Diane?
A little.
Did your system run about 300,000?
No, it was 200.
200,000.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay. So 25% depreciation.
In 5 years.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what happens if somebody moves who's an investor? Does that matter? Are they still an investor no matter where they go?
Right, it doesn't matter. In fact, there was no requirement that the investors be residents in the building. Anyone could invest in it. I mean, just like I invested in the Ferndale Church and I'm not a member of that congregation. So it's not a requirement. And you can preserve that no matter where you live.
So now that you've had some experience with it, and I know it's juggling crocodiles or some expression with trying to keep everybody happy and they're your neighbors and you share the laundry room and you've got all this going on, or the parking structure. Is everybody pretty happy with it being a PPA versus do you think that was the right decision to go?
I do think it was the right decision. Because that's how people voted. I personally didn't care. I mean, as with any solar project, it's very attractive over the long haul, but you have to find that money up front. And if people don't have the appetite, don't have the wherewithal, if it was going to be a burden to pay a special assessment or didn't want to participate in that, then to me, the PPA is still a win-win situation. And that's why I'm personally a big fan of that model. I would say it sits on the roof. It doesn't bother anyone. And so it's not necessarily in residents' day-to-day consciousness, although this person who's selling the unit, sees that as a positive, right, for our building. Another interesting thing that's a positive about our solar is that it effectively increases the capacity of our building's electric service. And we're now actively talking about putting in EV chargers. And so now we can support more EV chargers because we have solar on the roof than if we didn't. So, so it sits on the roof, it does its thing. There were questions in the beginning. One person asked, does it make noise? You know, other people were just not familiar with it. And I'm not hearing any complaints. I'm not hearing any people say, wow, I'm really glad we did that either, you know, except for our sustainability committee. But it's happening, the building's saving money. And if you look at it no other way, I would hope that that residents are happy about that part. Didn't cost the building anything, and they're saving
And
money.
you're saving money, yeah. Are you willing to share what the investor model looked like? So how much cash or how much in each investment was and what your annual return is? There's a couple questions to that.
As I said a minute ago, the overall cost was $200,000 and the shares were 10,000 each. And the return, based on the modeling that we did, yields, it's about a 5% return for the investors.
Okay. And that's an annual return that you get each year?
That's the IRR.
Okay.
You know, I don't remember what the payback is, or, you know, the break-even point for investors. I think it's 10 years out or something like that. So
Yeah.
we're still early.
So
in the
with your initial investment after when your year one taxes were done, because you were able to take the macros, you were able to take the opportunity zone, did you get like half returned in the first year? Half of your investment off your taxes?
I don't remember exactly what the opportunity zone amount was, to be honest. I haven't paid that close of attention, but I know if you buy a $10,000 share, you can take $3,000 off your taxes, right? And the depreciation is a calculation that I'm leaving to our accountant. I don't know that exact number. But we did run all those numbers, and that was an energy tool-based calculation. So.
And no one came back saying, I expected more. They were all pretty happy with what they did.
So a question on that, other PPAs have a flat rate where the purchaser knows has a guarantee on whatever price per kilowatt hour. Did you look at that model also? And if so, what was the basis for going with 80% rather than just have a flat rate for 20 years?
Well, we did look at that one. In fact, that is the approach that all the other PPAs in Michigan that I'm aware of take, including the Ferndale Church, where I have my other PPA. And one of the investors in our group said, well, why don't we just take a percentage off? That way it's easy for people to get your brains around. I'm saving 20% over what the utility would charge. That's the easy thing to digest instead of overcharging, 9.65 cents. Well, what does that mean? So it was, I think, a more digestible number. It does require, as I said earlier, calculations every month, because all the little elements in the DTE pricing can shift up and down by a fraction of a penny every month. So we have to recalculate that each month in our billing process. So there wasn't any more logic behind it than that, other than saying, that's easier to understand.
So you showed, and we know with the other models. So Diane was a solar coach with the Ann Arbor and Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and put together a solar toolkit for churches. And here in Detroit, we're also working on looking at how PPAs can work with nonprofits and churches and schools or other models. Do you think that with condominiums and apartment buildings, that this could be another big avenue for getting solar on the rooftops? And what would the difference between an apartment building and a condominium be? A lot of questions in there.
Well, I do. And one of the reasons and giving this talk tonight was a good exercise in that, because I'm familiar through my DOE work with the toolkit that came out of the Solar Faithful. And that is, now there are several churches or houses of worship in Michigan that use that model. So why can't we do the same thing with condominiums? A condo is different than an apartment. In an apartment building, there's one person who owns it. And maybe some arrangement could be worked out, from the renters buying it, but it's a little bit different dynamic than someone who owns a unit and arguably might be staying longer. But as I organized all my thoughts for this talk, that last slide that I showed that said, well, this is a summary of the steps, that could be the foundation for a toolkit. And we've got all the document templates and the steps that could come together even loosely. And that's the point that I was going to make, is that, yeah, we went through a lot of learning curves in putting this together. The next person who wants to do it shouldn't have to, right? So it'll be easier and less daunting. And I mean, frankly, this was hundreds of hours of my time trying to coordinate everything that was happening here. And if I wasn't so passionate about it, I don't know if I would have, stuck it out. But I'm happy for other people to learn from this and not have to slog through quite as much and say, well, the next one should be a little bit lighter of a lift.
Well, Diane, I spoke with Julie Stavelin, who works in the Michigan Energy Office a week ago, Friday, and they're very much interested in trying to develop a model kit for churches. And she specifically asked me whether GLREA would be helpful to the state of Michigan for exporting models with churches. And I mentioned that we have close ties with Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. I would imagine that the Michigan Energy Office would be very interested in a solar toolkit for condominiums. And we might be able to get some funding to put all these documents into a handy folder or something, and then we could ship it around, put it on our website or put it on D2 Solar's website, and then export it around the state. I think that would be something that we should think about.
Because it's not an intuitive process, in case you couldn't tell. And John, so the idea of saying, here is a toolkit, and I know Julie Roth is doing the same thing for Solarize for Ann Arbor. So the more accessible we can make this for people, if we can say, here's a lawyer you can call, or here's an accountant who's been through this, then people don't have to figure that out all themselves, and they might be likely to stick with it. So I would support that idea 100%. Everything that I've done is open source, and would love to see other condos take this step as well.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. So we working with Focus Hope, although it's not Focus Hope, it is the development corporation that came out of Focus Hope. They were looking at an apartment building, a couple of small apartment buildings, and looking at how to do solar. And one of the problems that came out of that was when each unit is metered individually. And then with a smaller building, you might not have quite the same burden for common area. So I think everybody's pretty familiar that with multi-units, there's 2 different meters, or there's actually several meters. Each tenant gets their own meter, and then all the interior lights go on the common meter. With the building that I have, we've got the solar on the roof for the common area, right? But as I went through this process, talking with other folks about it, I realized, no, we don't have individual bills for our units. We actually don't charge utilities because we have such a green building. It's just kind of folded into the rent. And everyone is just shocked at that, who's been talking with us with the 2030 district. There's a whole apartment multifamily subcommittee with that. And I was explaining, no, we don't have individual. And it just seemed, doing some research, and then Jackson couple was also working out or trying to figure this whole thing out. And we went to Julie Baldwin and said, help us find this. And we found this little tiny note in the Michigan energy law that says, no, you don't have to meter each unit separately. So that was quite the eye opener, that for apartment buildings, if they do want to have, especially low income apartment buildings, if you do want to put solar on and help the tenants have reduced energy costs, there is a way to do it that doesn't require that individual metering for each unit. So imagine, everybody gets an individual bill, and so everyone gets charged all those fees for each of those individual bills versus one bill. Now, which one does DTE want you to do? They don't like the one bill system. So that's why they kept refusing to hook up the building with that system. So sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper and find out more. But I digress. So we do see this as a really great system with power purchase agreements, especially with people that can't. So this is almost a community solar system, right? Where maybe you can't invest in solar on your own roof for whatever reason. I'm a renter. I can't, it's too shady. I don't know how long I'm going to live in this house for many, many reasons. You can invest in a church. You can invest in a school. You can invest in Detroit, we're looking at, even with the community centers, creating power purchase agreements as a system to do it. So does anybody have any other applications that you could maybe think of that this kind of system would work? We know we can't really do a green field because there has to be an off-taker for a power purchase agreement to work, and DTE is not buying power at a very high rate right now. But
Well, the obvious example, Diane, is schools. A lot of school districts don't have a lot of extra cash to front the upfront cost of putting solar on. But if we could find investors to put up the cash to put on the school, then the school signs a PPA to buy the power from the LLC that the investors create. So
it would have to be a year-round school. We've been looking at that for one of our Detroit schools, and then we realized, oh, you're not operating your building in the summertime, and then we'd only get paid the 7.5 cent rate. But community college, or a school, universities that have year-round and would be able to use that power in the summertime, excellent suggestion.
Does anybody have insight on the Harvest Solar interaction with Jackson schools that was announced just a couple days ago? They're putting solar on 3 elementary schools in Jackson. It's a PPA, but I don't have any more details. Anybody in our audience know about that?
Well, I know somebody that we could contact that could tell us all
We
about
happen to have a board member that we should. Yeah. We need to find out how they're getting that PPA. Especially Jackson, that's consumers, right? In Jackson. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we are available for other consultation or questions, as you can guess. Oh, somebody just posted. Thank you, David. There is a article in MLive about the Jacksons, so we'll look at that. Shameless advertising for the Renewable Energy Committee here in Detroit. This is a topic that we are working on with a number of churches and nonprofits, and we will be looking for investors. So stay tuned on that. We're also looking at the possibility of working with Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and we hope Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association to work on some grant money so that we can help those churches and nonprofits buy their own share. If they have an investor group of say 10 to get their solar, that they would own one of the shares themselves and accelerate the savings and help create a more equitable system for low-income neighborhoods here in Detroit. So stay tuned on Third Thursday for more information on that as we talk about our Detroit solar stories going forward. Any other shameless advertising anyone wants to promote? Now's the time. Any other news? Oh, somebody's holding up #1 issue. Hold it up so we can read the whole thing.
Yeah. Can you see the whole thing?
No. You have to
No.
cover up your face. Cover up your face.
Oh, okay. How's that?
Global warming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Vote. Vote.
Yeah.
It's a
accordingly. Yes.
bumper sticker. I'll send them to you free. Just give me an address.
#1 issue.
Okay.
I agree, 100%.
I got them. I got 1,000 of them. I'm
Oh.
giving them away.
Okay.
Okay. John Sarver Freeman can tell you how to get a hold of me.
Okay. Maybe you could send some on to GLREA. We'll have them as prizes for who attends the most solar stories in the next month. How's that?
Oh, okay. I need an address.
Not only shameless advertising, but shameless bribes.
There you go. Okay.
So the good news is that all of these recordings of every month, because it is a big commitment to sit on every Thursday night, they are all available. And John Sarver has been recording them for us. John, do you want to tell everybody how to find the archive of solar stories?
Well, GLREA does have a YouTube channel, so it's just a matter of either Googling Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association or Googling My Solar Story or, Ann Arbor Solar Stories. You'll end up at our channel. And then, we have different playlists for My Solar Story, for Detroit Solar Stories. So you'll be able to kind of track it down. We have over 40 videos now because we've been doing these Thursday Zooms for over a year now.
That's really terrific. And it's quite a legacy that's being created and a great opportunity for people to learn from those who are in the field actually doing it. And a lot of them are just folks like you and me, right? They're not always superstars like Diane Cheklich that's doing great work out there. Okay, I'm going to check my time and we're after time. So it's time for us to close. So thank you everybody for joining us on the third Thursday, Detroit Solar Stories. And next month, we'll be looking at another one of our nonprofits and how they were able to put their solar on the building.